Voters in Anchorage, Alaska send a strong message in favor of the natural family and natural marriage and against radical homosexual activism. I'm Matt Barber, Vice President of Liberty Counsel Action. Joining me in studio today is Shawn Akers, Vice President of Middle Eastern Affairs with Liberty Counsel. Shawn, voters in Anchorage, Alaska have overwhelmingly voted in favor of the natural family by rejecting Proposition 5. This was a measure that would have given special rights based on sexual behaviors, lesbian, homosexual, sexual behaviors, and even transsexual behaviors, cross-dressing, and so-called gender identity. A group of LGBT organizations that called themselves One Anchorage were pushing Proposition 5. It was defeated by a margin of 58% to 41%. It would have, again, added sexual orientation, gender identity to the city's code, whether real or perceived, for special protections, putting these aberrant sexual behaviors on a par with neutral qualities such as skin color and a person's gender and so forth. So voters in Alaska said, no way. That's good news.
No big surprise here, Matt. Almost every time that this comes before the actual voters, voters tend to be pro-natural family. It just is the core of the United States ethos that the nuclear family is what's made the United States a great society. It's what continues to make the United States a great society. And quite frankly, it's largely a media and a judicial sleight of hand to assume or to create the appearance that this great change from the nuclear family to these new situations is what's desired by the American people. It's simply not. And when it goes to the voters resoundingly, in this case, almost 60%, say that, you know what, we'd really like to keep the natural family the way it is.
Yeah, you know, polls time after time show consistently that people operate from a conservative perspective over a liberal perspective by typically a 2-to-1 margin. We see this play out in Anchorage. And as you point out, Shawn, the media, mainstream media, homosexual activist groups, so-called progressive groups, and media, particularly like MSNBC and so forth, push this meme that somehow we have moved beyond the intolerant ways of our past and that people have given up on old archaic notions of sexual morality and so forth. Well, baloney. And as we see, as you point out, every time it goes to the voters, almost without fail, even in liberal states, the voters come up supporting natural marriage and rejecting this ridiculous notion that somehow people who identify themselves based upon these certain, deviant sexual appetites, that they hold that as their deep identity, that's just not comparable to neutral, immutable qualities such as skin color and so forth. And in fact, it's really a disingenuous hijacking of the language of the noble civil rights movement. And I know a lot of, for instance, African Americans that are furious that radical homosexual activists have cynically co-opted and hijacked the language of civil rights in order to push their radical sexual anarchist agenda. A friend of mine, Pastor Ken Hutcherson, out in Seattle, Washington, an African-American former Dallas Cowboy football player, but he puts it this way. He says, don't compare your sin to my skin. And that's exactly what we saw them doing here in Anchorage. With Proposition 5, the voters overwhelmingly rejected that ridiculous notion.
You know, here's one of the things that's interesting about this, Matt. It's that the people recognize a difference between allowing individuals to take part in sinful behavior and having the state condone that behavior. So there's nobody here that's I don't see any great push among Americans to want to create some sort of force to monitor the activities of people that want to carry on this lifestyle. Yeah. But when it comes down to the state we the people acting. They don't want, the American people are still a conservative body who do not want the state to endorse or to create special rights or preferred status based on behaviors, and especially not, as you've pointed out, to compare with things like immutable qualities of skin color and those things that God placed in us innately. I'll tell you something encouraging about this, though, especially with Prop 5 in Alaska. Is the way that the people responded to, we can be cynical, Matt, and we think that if you spend enough money, you can buy any election. But the fact is that Tim Gill, the founder of Quark, a homosexual activist organization, funded the Prop 5 measure substantially.
Tim Gill, a multi-millionaire.
He put tremendous resources behind this, and it was a grassroots response by the ordinary people of Alaska that produced an almost 60%. It was a 58-41 split in support of the natural family here, Matt. It couldn't be bought.
That encourages me because, again, the tone you hear coming out of the mainstream media, coming out of Hollywood, coming out of the Obama administration certainly, is one that of inevitability, that this whole radical sexual anarchist agenda is a foregone conclusion and nothing we can do will stop it. Well, we just saw that idea crumble in Alaska on a micro level. I think we're starting to see it happen on a macro level. We really have a clash of worldviews, and President Obama supports this idea of moral relativism, sexual relativism. Well, every major world religion, as I often say, thousands of years of history, uncompromising human biology, reject aberrant sexual lifestyles, such as the homosexual lifestyle, transgendered lifestyle, and so forth. Yet President Obama comes from this worldview that is pushing this sexual anarchist idea, and the hypocrisy is palpable. He just recently came out, and we're going to talk about this later in the week, the president did, attacking the United States Supreme Court again. He did it famously during the State of the Union address on the Citizens United case with the Supreme Court justices sitting right there. This time he came out and attacked the Supreme Court, saying, this is clearly Obamacare was passed by somehow he figured a strong majority, which makes one scratch his head completely along partisan lines, and that it would be judicial activism to overturn it. Yet on the issues of marriage and family, this president has rejected the DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, which was passed by an overwhelming bipartisan majority with very few dissenting votes in 1996, signed into law by Bill Clinton. Yet the Obama administration has refused to do its duty to defend DOMA in a court of law. And so the hypocrisy for him to say judicial activism if the Supreme Court shoots down a clearly unconstitutional bill, DOMA clearly is constitutional, yet he rejects it and is pushing the court to overturn it. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. People like President Obama are showing their true hypocritical colors.
Well, you actually can have your cake and eat it too, but it requires a sacrifice, and the sacrifice is the rule of law. Yep. And what we see with both this sexual anarchy movement and with this administration, Matt, quite frankly, is a process that works very much like this. Let's attempt to make it look democratic. We'll put it on the ballot. If it fails at the ballot, then we'll challenge it in the courts. If it fails in the courts, then we'll do something entirely different legislatively. But the legislators know that they can't be elected and reelected in these things. So we've seen a version of Chicago politics applied in a national way that literally puts the expediency of your seat as a legislator in the balance if you don't do something that is quite literally detrimental to you. And that's why what you're seeing, and you'll continue to see it, is when people get the opportunity, they run as fast as they can from Obamacare and from some of these radical decisions because they know they can't maintain them at home.
Well, homosexual activists are livid that this ploy to gain special protections and rights for sexually deviant behaviors, for disordered conduct, has failed in Anchorage. People who support God's design for human sexuality, for natural marriage, for the natural family should be encouraged by this. We often get discouraged when we lose some of these battles through judicial fiat, when activist judges do push radical sexual anarchist positions, but we should be encouraged by what has happened in Anchorage. We should also be encouraged by battles that are going on in North Carolina and elsewhere to protect the natural family and natural marriage. Liberty Counsel is on the forefront doing just that. We do so with your support. Go to lc.org to learn how you can become part of Liberty Counsel's team or call us 800-671-1776.